Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Miracle Men, How Rassie Springboks Won the World Cup by Lloyd Burnard. My name is Jennifer Malik, and I'm the editor of the reading list. We're hosting this launch tonight along with Jonathan Ball Publishers, the publishers of Miracle Men. When Rassie Erasmus took over as coach of the Springboks in 2018, few thought they had a chance of winning the Rugby World Cup. The Boks had slipped to 7th in the world rankings and lost the faith of the rugby-loving public. But less than 2 years later, they were world champions. In Miracle Men, Lloyd examined how exactly this turnaround was achieved. The book is filled with marvelous anecdotes and sharp insights, and it's also an inspiring testimony to what can be achieved when a group of South Africans from all backgrounds come together as a team. For tonight's launch, Lloyd is joined by fellow sports writers Stephen Nell, Vata Ngobeni, and they'll be tackling tough questions from fellow journalist Tinus van Staden. Wherever you're watching this, YouTube, Facebook, please leave your questions in the comment section. We'll be coming to those questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions about the book or about what happened behind the scenes or any other sort of scandal that you've heard that you want confirmed or denied, let us know, and we'll have an audience Q&A at the end. So leave those questions in the comments. Without further ado, let me hand over to Tinus to take over the conversation and enjoy the launch.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us to discuss rugby and miracles. Like Jennifer just said, we all can remember those dark days in South African rugby history that weren't that long ago, 2016, 2017, when the Boks lost to everybody with record scores. There's something that happened in Albany, in New Zealand in 2017, but I'm not allowing myself to remember that. All I remember is something about 57-0, but I won't go any further into that. And then obviously Alistair Coetzee was the main character in those 2 years. He was the Boks head coach. After 2017, he got the boot, and in came Rassie Erasmus. And we all know the fairy tale that followed. But what we didn't know before Lloyd wrote Miracle Men was all the detail that went into the planning and the excess detail to give the Boks the best chance at success. From the traveling arrangement to analysis of referees, but we will get into that a bit later. Firstly, I just want to ask Lloyd two very simple questions. Why did you decide to write this book? And how did you go about gathering information? What was important to you?
Thank you, Tinus, and good evening to everybody watching, and thank you to you, Vata and Stephen, for chatting. It's obviously my first book, so in terms of going around and how we went about doing it, it was all quite a new experience for me. Look, I think anyone who saw what happened in 2019 in Japan knows that it's one of the great South African sports stories, I think, of all time. As you mentioned earlier, where this team came from in a period of 18 months to go from those lows to world champions was an incredible effort. But I think, I was lucky enough to be on that 5-day trophy tour when they returned from Japan victorious. And on the bus behind their open top bus traveling the country, 5 different cities in 5 days, and just seeing the way South Africa turned out in its masses and over that period of 5 days was unlike anything I've ever seen, in my journalistic career. And I think, if you're not inspired after seeing something like that, you probably never will be. I think that was probably where the idea to tell the story of exactly how this happened was born. And then as we evolved, it became very much a rugby book, in terms of telling the stories of what Rassie actually did on the field. Look, there were a lot of people who helped along the way. Jonathan Ball was fantastic from start to finish, especially given that they were working with a first-time author. And then SA Rugby were great in terms of, making players available. Rassie was fantastic. I spoke to him. It was kind of a journalistic project as well, as much as anything, which is what we do for a living, all of us. And it was just gathering, these kind of anecdotal snippets of information, but then also just the actual brickwork of how this win happened from players and coaches who were intimately involved with what happened. So that was kind of the process. We were under time pressures as well, as I suppose you always are when you do projects like this. But But I mean, it was just a process that I thoroughly enjoyed, and now a few months down the line, just incredibly grateful for the way it's all turned out.
Fantastic. Before we go into the good stuff, I want to go back to the bad times, because they had to be lows, to make the highs so spectacular and so special. So if you look at the 2016 and 2017 seasons, there were so many lows. I mean, Springboks lost to Ireland at home. They took record scores against the All Blacks. They lost to Argentina, to Italy, and that was not in soccer. So I mean, then you know that it's not going good. Should Boks supporters have any sympathy for Alistair Coetzee?
It's an interesting word choice. Sympathy is not really something that exists at this level, right? I mean, when it comes to Test match rugby and Springbok rugby, it's not really a word that the passionate South African fan has in his or her vocabulary. We're a very expectant rugby public. We demand results. We've got such a proud history in this game. And, for those reasons, I don't think anyone's ever going to be sympathetic. I think what's happened since then is maybe, people have lost perhaps unfairly so, lost a bit of respect for Alistair, which I don't think is fair. If you go back to when he was appointed, no one raised an eyelid at that. I mean, it was absolutely the right appointment. Alistair at the time was the most experienced of our Super Rugby coaches that we had. He had 5 consistent years with the Stormers, had been involved in successful Boks setups before. And it was absolutely the appointment that made all of the sense in the world. Obviously, what unfolded in the next 2 years, we all saw, and it was just a series of incredibly unfortunate results. As a Springbok team, you're not going to ever be able to put up results like that without the backlash that did come. So I don't know if people should be more sympathetic to what happened, because, I mean, Alistair more than anyone will know the nature of the beast, and he will have known the expectations of the public when stepping into the job. I'm sure he's not looking for sympathy himself. But I think we, as a rugby public, we're probably looking back now, we could have been a bit more respectful with the way we speak about him in the 2 years that have passed.
Yeah, but maybe more understanding. Stephen, I'd like to bring you in here, because you've been writing about Western Province and Stormers for ages, and for a long time after that, Alistair was coach there. What made him a successful provincial and franchise coach, but then one who struggled to make it at the international level?
Well, Tinus, I think what one has to bear in mind is that when Rassie got Alistair involved at Western Province, and what happened there was Rassie became the director of rugby eventually, and he and Alistair complemented one another very well, I thought. Rassie at that stage wasn't as mature as he is now. I think Rassie's maturity came, with the move to Munster, I think was very, very important in his development as a person. So Rassie was exposed to pressures, I think, in Western Province that you don't get in Free State when you coach in Free State. Western Province is a difficult province to coach in. I think at that stage, Alistair was Alistair was a very comfortable guy, so it was a very good plan for Rassie to come up with a vision, and for Alistair then to implement it with Jacques Nienaber's help. So I think they complemented one another very well in that sense. They had the best of both worlds, so to speak. I think Alistair was a person with good intentions, and I'm well aware of his strengths. But that he did make mistakes at Springbok level. I was there all the way, and I do feel that being the case. And for me, from the outset, I was wondering a little bit about Alistair's vision. For example, just an example was the appointment of Adrian Strauss as the captain. Now, I think Adrian is a very good player, and he proved himself as a captain, but Alistair knew from the outset that Adrian was going to retire, and that he wouldn't walk the path in the long term. So I kind of felt, maybe there was a need for a vision, and Alistair came in and, in a way, almost tried to consolidate, take steps like that he wasn't really going forward. And I think he had a bit of another issue with Alistair, possibly, and this probably comes from is something that, in a way, brought success at the Stormers with Jacques' help and Rassie's help, but there was a bit of a fixation with defence, an aversion to flair. He would cast away, for example, a player like Faf de Klerk, and we would think we have a scrum-off problem, and Rassie would come and he would turn Faf almost into one of the best scrum-offs in the world. So I just felt that it was, was a bit conservative in the way he was operating. I also thought he was, caught unawares a few times. I don't think his prep was as good as you would have with Rassie, for example. I remember one game against Wales. I think it was the last one before they played Wales at the end of 2017, and they were talking about how they think Wales were going to play, and they felt Wales were only going to play in one way, and it was ball in hand. And the game started, and Dan Bigger cross-kicked all over the show, and the next thing you know, I don't know how far Wales were leading. So, and I'm also not sure about, the way he managed the people around him. Maybe, I think, Lloyd, you were there, one of the assistant coaches, tried to pick an argument with me at a press conference after I pointed out something they hadn't done well in the loss to New Zealand in Albany.
It's a standard Tuesday for you, Steve.
Hey?
It's a standard Tuesday in Belleville for you, yeah?
And I said to him, but hey, you guys lost 57-0, and you could hear a pin drop. But I thought the guys were, in a way, in the wrong mindset. So yeah, but fair game to Alistair. He did well at the Stormers, and I have a lot of respect for him. I like him. So it doesn't feel great for me to talk about his failings. I could give you quite a long lowdown on his successes as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Vata, there's also a human side to this, because we see these people as Boks coaches, but that's not all they are. And can you tell us a bit more about Alistair the man, and what toll you think it would have taken on him to see the Boks under someone else now go on and win the World Cup after you've been crucified for what happened the last 2 years?
I think, Tinus, you raise a good point about there's a human being there. It's not just a coach. As a father, as a husband, and as a friend. And I think once you've known Alistair long enough, the jovial side of him comes out, and he's just a pure rugby man. He just enjoys the game itself. You look at his humble beginnings from Grahamstown. Went on to Port Elizabeth, became one of the icons of rugby in Port Elizabeth, and when he then joined Jake White's coaching team and they went on to win the World Cup, a lot of Black South Africans, I think, looked at him and said, thank goodness there's Alistair Coetzee, who's now taken away this thing of either being a go-to coach or a go-to player and so on. And everyone just respected him for his rugby knowledge and the human being that he was. And unfortunately, I think his tenure came, 2 years late. I think he should have probably taken over from Jake White because he understood the players so well. He understood, what the team was all about. And I think you needed the sort of continuity when it came to coaching. So when Alistair came in, again, no one saw him as a Black Springbok coach. They saw him as Alistair Coetzee because he was that relatable, kind of coach. And unfortunately, I think him being too nice would have contributed to his demise. Because once you step into that job, first of all, it changes the human being. But secondly, you have to change with the job itself, because it calls for a stronger person with the strong character and a strong backbone. Because there's some decisions that you're going to have to make that might be very unpopular, but you're going to have to stand by those decisions. And unfortunately, for a guy like Alistair, who I think is friendly with a lot of people, and would have tried to please all quarters, would have tried to please, his bosses, his employers, would have tried to please his players and his management, but also the rugby public at large. And we know how divided the South African rugby public is. We just divide ourselves when it suits us into, if you're black, and then there's colored, and there's the Indians, and amongst the colors, then there's the Muslims and the Christians, and then amongst the white folk, then the Afrikaner and the English. So, you're trying to be everything to everyone, and you can't be that as a Springbok coach. I think you would have had to just get the strongest out of him out. Where you stand by the decisions you make, and you realize that yes, you're going to make a lot of people angry. However, you're doing it for that badge and for the country itself. So unfortunately, I think the human being got in the way of a strong Springbok coach, and unfortunately for him, some of the decisions he made along the way came back to bite him. I think I always think back about the decision not to appoint Sia as captain, when not just the team wanted that, but the entire country was calling for Sia when Warren Whiteley got injured. Against Ireland at Ellis Park, and it hurt the country. It just didn't hurt it hurt him, as well, because everyone would have said, you out of all people should understand more than anyone that Sia is probably the right man for the job, and right player for the job. So those things I think came in the way of him having, it stopped him from becoming the person that we would have seen in Japan last year, the 2nd of November. And then unfortunately, at some point you got to stop being human and you got to become a Springbok coach.
Yeah, that's very well put. Alistair did not appoint Sia captain, Lloyd, but after Alistair was sacked, in came Rassie, and he made Sia captain. What did Rassie focus on? What changed after Rassie came on board?
Well, you coming in, the time element was always the thing that stood out when Rassie and Rob came over. You just looked at the time left from that point until Rugby World Cup 2019. And it just didn't seem like there was enough of it to do anything of significance and turn the ship around, effectively in a 180. For Rassie, having spoken to him and the players, it was very clear that, the going back to basics in terms of the philosophy of what it meant to be a Springbok needed to be done straight away. They spent a lot of time behind closed doors as a group in camp when he first came in, before working on game plans and tactics and things on the training ground, discussing what it meant to be a Springbok, stripping it down to its bare bones again. They speak a lot about the main thing being the main thing throughout the journey, and that kind of philosophy was born very early on, with an acceptance that to be a team that inspires the rugby-loving public, you have to win first. Before you do anything else, you have to put everything else to one side, and you have to become a winning team. That was a mindset change that had to happen very quickly when Rassie came in. He had already, as Steve said, at Munster and his time together with Jacques, I think developed into one of the most highly rated kind of, man managers, modern trend kind of tacticians in the game at the time. He came in incredibly highly rated, both in Europe and here, given the work he had done in South Africa before he came back. But still, that task just seemed, too much in that space of time for any coach. So I think the philosophy was one of the first things he had to change. And then you spoke a bit earlier about the fitness and the work being done on the training ground in terms of getting those guys fit. And then it was a case of building that kind of squad depth and ensuring, in the space of 18 months, making every single test match count, because you've only got so many in the space of 18 months. And 2019 was a shortened year as well. So he had to be incredibly meticulous in his detail and in his planning, and kind of have this timeline over the period of 18 months where on the field and off, there were plans in place that could be reached along the way. And that's a common theme that emerges from any player you talk to who worked under Rassie during that time. It's just that meticulous attention to detail that applied to absolutely everything, that applied to off-field stuff to philosophy to understanding your role in the team, your role as a South African, Springbok, and then understanding the way you needed to play and what was expected of you out on the field. It extended to every aspect of what these guys did over that period of 18 months. I mean, obviously now it's easy to say, it was an absolute master plan and everything kind of worked because we won the thing. But it certainly is something that when you talk to the players that emerges as being consistent. I would say that incredible attention to detail is probably the thing that separated them.
Yeah, that's. I mean, like you say, it's straight through that attention to detail. Vata, do you think the South African rugby-loving public immediately bought into Rassie as the new Boks coach and into his vision and into his plans, or when did they start to actually believe that listen here, the Boks are in good hands?
It depends, Tinus, which one of the rugby mad publics you're talking about in South Africa, because you've got many variations of them. I think that the guys who just are blind loyalists to Springbok rugby believe every single new coach is going to be the guy who saves, Springbok rugby. So they believe that Rassie was the messiah from the onset. Then you had the doubters, who told you that it's been 10 years of not winning a World Cup. It's been 10 years of going through some pretty, serious lows where we've gone to dark places. And then you just had the pure and out skeptics, which you said, bring whoever is not going to save the team, especially where we are right now. And I think the doubters started, waning down when Sia became captain, and we won against England at Ellis Park. Then you had the complete detractors who had to wait for Bloemfontein to happen in order for them to actually believe that we're going somewhere, and then, as I said, the blind loyalists would have told you after that comeback in Ellis Park that, the Messiah has arrived and, and he's going to do the job first. So, again, you got to look at it, according to whose eyes you're looking at Springbok rugby through. So, but I think the real belief that Rassie could make a big difference in South Africa in Springbok rugby came after the one in Bloemfontein, that series winning test. The way in which the team came back in both test matches, started telling you something about Springbok rugby. We're going back to what made us strong. There's that unwavering, belief that the Springbok can defeat anyone on any day and any way. And those two test matches with the kind of the debutants and youngsters in that team and the mix of the players themselves where, for the first time, Rassie said something, says, I didn't see Sia as a black Springbok. I picked a captain. However, that also embraced a large part of our population that has been, excluded by the game of rugby. Not only are you bringing this black population that's always loved rugby, not just into the rugby fraternity, but into actually Springbok rugby, something that they believed, shunned them and didn't want them, and all of a sudden, in one fell swoop, you've not only endeared yourself, to the black population, but you've gained probably the biggest, pool of supporters that you can as a Springbok coach, and just winning that test with Beast in his 100th test and being in Bloem on June 16, Sia's birthday. I think, all of that with all the right ingredients, for a long time what divided this country, but, again, we share a powerful history, but also it brought us together again on that day, and everyone started believing that, we could do something good here.
Yeah, definitely. I also remember at the first test of that series in Ellis Park with that fantastic comeback when the Guijo squad was there and they were actually singing, and it was just a total different, more inclusive feel about the Springboks. But Stephen, I want to bring you in here. I want to talk a bit about game plan. You spoke about Alistair being very defensive minded, but I also remember that during his time as Boks coach in 2016 and 2017, the Boks were criticised for not having a clear-cut game plan. What do you think the game plan was under Alistair, and how did that change under Rassie?
Well, Tinus, I would rather actually refer to use some of Rassie's strengths as a point of reference. So I think when you're in a position where there's so much pressure, sometimes you become reactive, and Alistair was under a heck of a lot of pressure. You then start pinning your hopes to players. You're hoping Morné Steyn will win you the game against the All Blacks with penalties in Durban like he did in 2009. But it's now 2016, so there's a heck of a lot of pressure. And I did think it went better with the Springboks in 2017. I thought it's always good to, if you're under pressure, it's always good to have a guy like Brendan Venter to bring some clarity of thought. But what I would say, I'd rather look at Rassie's strengths, and he would bring something like the defensive system that they implemented in 2016. And I looked at it and I thought, what, are you nuts? I mean, all the space they were leaving on the outside, but they were creating so much pressure that they almost, it was, for me, it was genius, the defensive system that Jacques put in place from the outside. Reflecting on it now, it was genius. And then you have things like, the bomb squad is a well-known chapter in Springbok rugby. So you had that ability to just think think revolutionary. Bring something different. And you can talk game plan, but who's the person who's going to come up with that little bit of X factor that's that's something that Rassie just has a way of coming up with. And I think that's where Rassie sets himself apart, to be honest. And obviously he had a very set way about playing about the way he was playing, and he brought South African rugby at its best, and we saw it at the World Cup again, is often predictable. There's certain things we do really well, and if we do them really well, and if we execute them well, then it's very difficult to stop us. And Rassie tapped into our strengths, and he brought those his own genius touches.
Yeah, Lloyd, there's one of my personal favorite parts of Miracle Men has to do with game plan, but it has to do with two personalities clashing, or not clashing, but two rugby ideas clashing, and that was Swys de Bruin, that was brought in as an attack consultant. He was still the Lions head coach. He was obviously a fan and a believer in attacking rugby, attacking the space, beating your man. Then on the other side of the coin, you have Jacques Nienaber, who's more defensive-minded and more forward-dominated, kick-dominated, with Rassie, the man in the middle, to try and strike the balance between those two. Tell us a bit about that dynamic between those three.
Sure, yeah, it was very interesting, and Swys was fantastic in chatting to him, for the book. He was obviously a big part of what happened over the period of the 18 months. I think he stayed in that role as attack coach all the way through to the Rugby Championship campaign in 2019. I think after the draw in New Zealand, he left, then citing just a struggle with kind of, which has been well documented since, his struggle with kind of stress and anxiety, personal issues that he's experienced over that time. But it was, Swys is a guy who's incredibly spiritual and incredibly passionate about playing attractive running rugby. And when he was brought into that Springbok setup in 2018, he kind of had a big role to play in that, and wanted the Boks to become this team that would score these dazzling tries, much like we had seen at the Lions, over the previous 3 years, where he worked for 2 of those years in the final under former coach Johan Ackerman. The Lions were doing something that the rest of the franchises in South Africa at the time, weren't, and they were just a little bit ahead in this kind of willingness that existed across the board. The franchises were all trying to play a more expansive game. Steve, you'll remember All Black Mondays at Province when they try to, mold what they were doing based on what they saw the Kiwis doing, playing this more expansive, skills-heavy type of rugby. But the Lions in South Africa were really the benchmark in terms of playing that way. Sway saw signs of that over the period of his time with the Springboks. You speak about the comeback at Ellis Park, and there was even a game on the end of year tour in Scotland where the Boks won quite comfortably, and he felt like on that day they had played a really attractive running game of rugby. And he would have these conversations with Rassie and Jacques all the time. I mean, he tells stories of him and Jacques staying up in the team hotel till the early hours of the morning, kind of chatting about this, like almost like arm wrestle between Sway's trying to get these guys to play. But as the journey kind of got longer, it became an acceptance from Rassie's side, from Sway's side, that wasn't going to be the way the Boks were going to win the World Cup. They were going to go to their traditional strengths. It was going to be set piece. It was going to be accurate tactical kicking. It was going to be big defense. Sway's kind of watches this thing unfold over this period of time, and this acceptance comes that he's not going to get his way in Japan, to the point where he thinks to himself, well, actually, if I go, I'm not sure it's best for the team. I'm going to be like pushing them to play this way. Should I even be there? And takes the decision to step down. The fantastic thing about this relationship is that throughout these conversations and late night chats and kind of arm wrestling for playing style, there's just a level of respect that exists throughout between Rassie and Sway's, who he called Pa, referred to him as Dad, I'm sure, and Jacques and Jacques and Sway's as well. Just an absolute respect that exists between all of them. Where if you speak to Rassie and Jacques now, they will tell you how instrumental Sway's was in terms of, because if you look at the final, you look at the tries we scored, counter-attacking tries. A certain sharpness on counter attack that exists, and Sway's is considered instrumental in putting those building blocks in place in terms of earning the right, winning that space out wide, but then when you get it, knowing what to do and where to go. So I mean, he played a massive role in the ultimate success of the Springboks in 2019, even if he wasn't there on November 2. Yeah.
Now, obviously, Sway's is not there anymore, and Rassie is now only the director of rugby, Jacques Nienaber. But now we have to look at him in this context of he is on the one end of the spectrum with Sway's on the other end of the spectrum, and Rassie sort of the man in the middle, trying to balance these two ideas. But now suddenly Jacques is the head coach. Vata, do you think there will be a lack of a measured voice? Or is that not a problem anymore? Because is it now a case of the Boks know what they're going to do for the future? They won the World Cup with this type of rugby. This is what they're going to do now. Don't expect dazzling tries.
I'm leaning towards what Stephen said earlier on about Rassie playing to the strengths of the Springboks. Why do you need a measured voice when you're the most powerful team in the world? When you can just bash away through everybody? However, you do need a measured voice, and I think a guy like Felix Jones will play a pivotal role when it comes to that. He's worked with Jacques and with Rassie at Munster, and when he came in, he just gave another dimension to how, add another dimension to how the Springboks should look at the way they attack first of all, but also the way they defend. And then there's Van Staden, and I think I like the anecdote that came from the semi-final of Rugby World Cup, where Cheslin Colby was injured, and Rassie said a long time ago the team that he picks his team on Monday, he tells the guys you're playing, and he doesn't change the team no matter what happens. And obviously Cheslin had been a big part of the Springboks run to the semi-final, and now he got injured and he's out, and Spoon Coach is going to play on the wing, and then they realized on Friday, captain's run, that Cheslin is as fit as it can be. And Rassie said his mindset of playing games with him, and whether he should pick, remove Spoon and play Cheslin. And that's when Van Staden came to him and said to him, don't do that. You lose a change room. So guys like Stick, are also going to be just as important because they're also just as measured. I think a lot of credit needs to go to, Rassie's support team, technical team, during the World Cup and even prior to that, because he was really, sponging and feeding off a lot of what they were thinking and what they were saying to him, there was no culture of fear within that management team. Everyone was allowed to have their voice. And again, as Lloyd alluded to early on, is that you had Swayze with this attack-minded attitude, and he knew then that his philosophy and that of Rassie was clashing. And instead of going to a World Cup with varying views and not agreeing on one thing, he stepped aside. So a guy like Stick, as much as he is attack-minded, and a lot of people I think doubt the values actually brought into the Springbok team. I think a guy like Rassie knew way before what values on the Stick would bring. So I think Jacques will again look at what happened in the build-up to the World Cup, during the World Cup, and realize that technical team is probably the best he's going to have if he's going to become successful as a ball coach.
Yeah, sure. And Stephen, we've spoken about Cheslin Corby now. The Boks still have the ability to score off counter-attack, especially, and they have X-Factor players. I think, like you mentioned earlier, what difference do you get from guys like Cheslin and Makazole Mapimpi, and what difference do they make to the team?
Well, look, Cheslin is a very interesting one because, I myself have been guilty of being a sizist sometimes in rugby. When I saw Cheslin play the first time, I was at Newlands, and I think Western Province were playing Griquas. I can't remember whether it was a Vodacom Cup match or whatever, and somebody kicked on Cheslin, and Cheslin ran, and it was as if the whole field stood still. And as Cheslin ran to the try line, and it was just an unbelievable try. And when I saw him play a couple of times, for Western Province before he kind of stepped to the foreground, I thought this guy was amazing, and I was a massive advocate for him. I started doubting him a little bit, and I'm telling you now about the mistakes I made, but I started doubting him a little bit when he was playing for the Stormers, but I think in a way maybe he was a victim of the way the Stormers were playing. And that is, I think, when the sizes came out in a lot of us. So, but he's a player that can do things that no one else can. So when you have a guy like that in your team, you have a point of difference because the threat is always going to be there. What I also like about Mapimpi is also a great flair player, but he also wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So sometimes the fact that somebody's not coming through that comfort zone of a Model C school, etc., gives them a mental fortitude to go with the flair. As we saw, a fantastic finisher. World class again. I think above a lot of people's expectations. And as I said with Cheslin, from a counter-attacking point of view, you can't ask for more. So I think they bring a heck of a lot. Yeah.
I'd like to talk a bit about the fact that they weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth, like you say. A lot of players weren't, and we'll get to that a bit later. But now, Lloyd, I want to hear from you. So now the Boks. So Swayze is gone. They won the Rugby Championship in 2019. Now their preparations for Japan, it doesn't start. It started a while ago, but it's well underway. What did their planning also entail?
Well, before they left, the recon mission was obviously hugely significant. Rassie and Alec Walters hop on a plane and with JJ, the logistics head, go to Japan, 9 months in advance to kind of, effectively live in Japan and follow the route of travel and accommodation that the Springboks would have in Japan in the months to come. We speak about that level of detail in the planning, and that's a fantastic example of something that actually doesn't have anything to do with what's happening on the field. The chefs at the hotels were all consulted in terms of the food they would be serving at the hotels, the quality of the sleeping facilities, the rooms and the hotels were all tested out, and then kind of on the traveling from city to city, there was a decision taken from Rassie and Aled to use public transport. Instead of flying around, they would use the public transport on offer in Japan to kind of test it out and see if it was a viable option for the players. It would end up being a decision that shaved off hours of traveling time for the Springboks in Japan, and more than that, the train kind of gave you a freedom of movement. Stretching the legs. These are not small guys who are traveling around from city to city, and the travel generally comes after a game. So those are, for Aled, those are crucial hours of recovery, and how you spend those hours is important to how you play the next game. So yeah, I mean, in terms of that level of detail on that recon mission, I think that was hugely significant. And then obviously they were the first team in Japan. That's another thing that we talk about a lot. They made a point of getting over to Japan before any other side arrived in the country. Based themselves in one of the most humid cities in the country, really just trying to acclimatize to those conditions as soon as they can. And that warm-up game against Japan, I'm not sure how everyone else feels about it, but I mean, that was, I think, a huge benefit of getting to the tournament early, is playing against the tournament hosts in a warm-up game before the tournament began, to really test yourselves against the team that's probably the most comfortable, obviously, in those conditions. So in terms of fitness and pushing yourself for 80 minutes and seeing how much these guys had in the tank when they got there, I think that was an important fixture, which the Boks obviously won quite comfortably in the end, but it was certainly a game they had to work for. The 20-week journey that guys like Francois Lloyd tell you about, and that started at the Bloem camp, before they left, that kind of 20-year period of being in camp until the end of the World Cup. I mean, training sessions, every training session, every fitness routine, every day, almost every hour of every day, just mapped out for that entire period. It really is incredible to think that you had a situation where you could look 20 weeks into the future and have your entire life planned out for you, almost to the flipping step. Sure. So yeah, I mean, it was Tinus on the field and off. They were very well prepared, and I think it reflected in the results.
Yeah, they were well prepared, but they did lose the first game against New Zealand, and then they beat Italy in a must-win game. But there were a few distractions away from the field, Lloyd. I'm going to throw this one back to you, because you also go into a bit of detail in the book about those incidents. The one is the bomb squad story, and the other one was the sword hanging over Ibn Etzebet's head. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, the Ibn story was big, and that was big because it happened before they left. This alleged assault in Langebaan, people have come forward and there's investigations happening. And it's literally happening, days, or I think it might have been, 48 hours kind of before this team was leaving to go to Japan. I think it was fantastic the way that, SA Rugby stood by Ibn at the time. This kind of show of unity with their player and trusting the player, that was important, to kind of take the stand and kind of say, until anything's been proven against them, we have to kind of stand alongside this guy. I think that was important. I think Mark Alexander had a big role to play in that as SA Rugby president. There were a lot of pressures coming internationally, and understandably so, for SA Rugby to act on that. Given the nature of the allegations, would it be very easy for an administration to buckle under that weight of public expectation and pull the plug on the Guys World Cup. I think it was probably a bit closer than we might realize. And the bomb squad, I mean, that's not something you can ever prepare for. Who would have thought going into a game like that at the end of a routine win over the Italians, that would be what we wake up to the next day. It did impact the squad. You speak to the players, and maybe like the kind of the perception they wanted to give off after that was that they were okay. But now that the tournament's over, when you speak to them, it did impact the squad. Rassie says that day in the hotel, he was a guy who didn't do one-on-one chats with his players. It was just known. You don't have one-on-one chats. If we discuss things, we discuss them openly. I'll tell you why you're not playing in front of everyone. And he had, 5 or 6 guys knocking on his door over that little period, wanting to have one-on-one chats because of what happened with the bomb squad. Now, in hindsight, it's an absolutely ridiculous story when you know the facts of what happened. But at the time, the age we live in and social media and Twitter, and the way it blew up and, the way it looked and, certainly a distraction. It's crazy to think now how excited, South Africa got about all of that. But I mean, we are a unique nation when it comes to those things. Two big distractions, Tinus, but I think both of them, and from top to bottom, not Rassie and talk administratively, I think both of them were handled very well.
Yeah. Vata, and like we just spoke about the bomb squad incident, it was so bizarre actually, but it also showed that, because I mean, this was actually such a inclusive and a team that showed the demographics of South Africa, a transformed team, but that does still show a few old wounds that's still there. What did you make of the bomb squad incident?
Let me be out there, Dennis, and just tell you, I think it was a storm in a teacup. I just couldn't understand, and unfortunately, I'm not too big on social media. So when things happen on Twitter, I look at them and I laugh, because there's one thing about Twitter I've learned is that there's only one rule, is that there are no rules. So when people start bringing up things on Twitter, I look for the humor in them, the comedy. And yes, Tinus, you're right. It brings up old wounds. What happened there would have brought up old wounds. But I think that's the kind of nation we are. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves of how bad things have been in order to really, really, appreciate what we have. And I think many of the detractors of the Springboks on both sides would have enjoyed what was happening with the bomb squad, because that's a kind of negative news that fuels their beliefs that all is bad about Springbok rugby. Whether you're looking at from being a black person or a white person. However, I think those who understand rugby and people who love rugby and would have taken the time just to watch the clips a little bit longer, would have realized that, it's not what it is. And I mean, Lloyd, alluded to it, is a pain the players went through. I think Makazola Mapimpi especially, and Lukanya Am were pains to explain to a lot of black people that, guys, this has got nothing to do with race. It's got to do with the dynamic of the team and how the team is set up. And you've got to understand that those guys are the guys on the bench. They're called the bomb squad, and they even shoot away. What's his name now? The tall lock. How can I forget him?
Lloyd
Burnard as well. He got shoot away as well, and they went looking for a Herschel Yankee. So again, sometimes you allow perception to become reality, and that's not the case. And unfortunately, it needs moments like that again, where those old wounds are just, opened up a little bit, and we understand the pain of them in order to appreciate how good we have it. And boy, did we have a good with that Springbok team. Or we still have a good with the Springbok team, because it's still number one in the world. And even through that, they went on, to win the World Cup. They used that actually to make South Africa realize about how united they really are, but truly united. And not just through words, but through deeds as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, Lloyd, then next up for the Boks, host Japan in the quarterfinal. That's also sadly where Japan's fairy tale ended.
Yeah, and a lot was made of the draw and kind of the who you're going to be playing against in the quarterfinals. I mean, if we're all honest with ourselves, it was a great draw for the Boks to come out of that and play against the hosts. It's a game you'll always expect South Africa to win, and they did comfortably enough. And I suppose it was around. Would later reveal that that's where Vili picked up his injury and kind of was struggling for form, and that's where the real I guess backlash from South Africa started. Not backlash, but this kind of frustration in terms of the playing style. When you're playing against a side like Japan, who you expected to dominate in all departments, and even though Japan were playing so incredibly well at the time. But I remember the reactions kind of around the box kicking that day, and just like Faf going boom, 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 and guys sitting at home just going, come on, like we're a Springbok team and we're just kicking the ball away. I think those frustrations, if Billy drops a few balls, Faf maybe gets a few kicks too far or too close and kicks a couple straight up, and guys are really looking at the style and the way this team is playing and going, based on this, it's probably not good enough to win the tournament. I mean, you're now in a semi-final, but have you really seen enough over the period of the tournament from the loss to the All Blacks? You haven't really been tested in terms of opposition. Now you've kicked your way to a victory against Japan, relied on a couple of moments to score. But have you really played well enough to be in a position where you can challenge for a World Cup title? And I think even after that win, probably the answer was no. There's still other teams in the competition that are significantly better than you. So I don't think everyone was really sold after the quarterfinal win.
Stephen, and that box kicking, it reached its peak in the Wales game. I mean, if you are someone that doesn't know anything about rugby and that's the first game of rugby you watch, you'd never want to watch rugby ever again. But it was actually a fascinating game. It's also in the book. They also say that Rassie says it was a game of patience. From your perspective, what makes Wales a tough team to beat? And did you actually enjoy that semi-final against the Welsh?
No, I was very nervous. There was a time in the game, I can't remember whether it was just before or after halftime. I can't exactly remember, when I felt there was a bit of a momentum shift in Wales's favour. And then I got really nervous, to be honest with you. And I think when Damien Dalenda came up with that bit of magic, then there's just certain things that happen in the game, that are big, and your big players come to the fore. But it's also one of those games, in a way, sometimes luck also has to be on your side, and people sometimes underestimate the role that luck plays. And I'm not necessarily saying the Springboks are lucky, but there are crucial calls in games that go your way or may go for or against you. So yeah, I was heck of a nervous. I mean, Wales are a good side, and and they're coached by an incredibly smart man. And that's always the danger. If you're bringing in Gatland, you're probably bringing a guy very much almost like Rassie to the equation, because he's just so astute and so smart. And then you're playing a really solid team. Wales are strong in the basics, got good halves, good outside backs. So you're playing, and I think, as Rassie says, they're very tough. But yeah, very nervous indeed.
Vata, and then in the other semi-final, there was in Miracle Man, it's described as one of the greatest World Cup semi-finals ever. And I mean, it's hard to argue with that, with England beating the All Blacks. I want to talk to you about that semi-final. I want to hear from you if you think that was England's final, and then also how did that help the Boks, and then how good were they in the final?
Tinus, when you speak about great semi-finals, my goodness, I think we've seen some fantastic one over the years, in World Cups. But I've got to agree with Lloyd. This one is up there with them, if not the best semi-final. And unfortunately, I think when you look at it, Tinus, when you look at how the teams that fell off, either in the quarters or the semis, would have played their best game in the game prior to that. And I didn't feel that England played their final in the semis. I just think they fell victim to the hype that came with their victory. I think they still had a lot in the tank. They still, could have played a level above, what they did in the semi-final. When you got a guy like Eddie Jones in the change room, who was able to be the voice of reason and the calming voice in the Springbok change room in 2007. There's no reason why, when you played the way you have against undoubtedly one of the greatest teams in the history of the game, and beaten them soundly in a World Cup semi-final. They don't lose semi-final knockout matches. And to beat the All Blacks, and then you get to a final and you don't pitch up. I don't think it's got to do with you having played the final before. It's you having believed during that week that all you had to do was just World Cup. That Springbok team that you're gonna face is the one that lost in the first game against a team that you beat soundly. And unfortunately for them, I think they underestimated the Springboks. I think they didn't go back to 2 years prior to that when they came to South Africa, and they forgot the kind of Springbok team they encountered. And by forgetting that, you're forgetting that it was the same team under the same coach, same captain that was there facing in that final. So unfortunately for them. And again, Tinus, once you get into a game of rugby, those inches that your confidence grows, and those scrums really they got pummeled on defense. So again the Springboks just grew with confidence in the game, and the English began doubting themselves. They began looking at the days prior to that when they were joking around in the press conferences, when they hardly trained at all, and they just believed that they just had to arrive, and they said to themselves, we should have done the prep from Monday. And there is no amount of time in a game that can make up for the time lost in a week ahead, especially for World Cup final. So unfortunately for them, I think believing their heart, believing their media, and believing that they just had to rock up and the Springboks would lie down and allow them to run all over them, was their biggest mistake.
Yeah. And that obviously didn't go well for them. I only have one more question for each one of you, and then we'll take a few from the listeners. Lloyd, the Boks won the World Cup. It was an amazing moment. You went on the trophy tour. You saw people's reaction to new heroes like Mapimpi, like Lucanio Oshel Jantjies, Dwayne Vermeulen, Siya Kolisi. What did you see on that trophy tour?
Yeah, as I said earlier, Tinus, I mean, you and I were lucky enough we were in, a year ago now, we were at year and a bit ago, you and I were at Lords watching probably the greatest cricket World Cup final, probably the greatest game of cricket we'll ever see. We get to do some incredible things in this job that we're in. I don't see how anything that happens moving forward tops what I experienced over those 5 days. As a proud South African, you couldn't look at what was happening there and not feel emotional, just seeing the country kind of showing its finest qualities. And as I wrote in the book, in that trophy tour chapter, it really just was such a brief glimpse of what this country is capable of in its unity when we're all on the same page and supporting the same things. We can really be a beautiful country. It doesn't last long enough. We kind of go back, the bus leaves and the Boks leave and they go away, and then we kind of go back to the same old. But, just for those 5 days, seeing South Africa turn out like that, the looks on people's faces will honestly live with me forever. I see them vividly still now. Just stunning, I mean, whether you're in CBDs, suburbs, the townships through the Eastern Cape is just something that, it's so difficult to describe. You just had to see it with these masses of people, that energy that came from them, this excitement of seeing these heroes that for the first time ever were their own. They owned these heroes. These are people who've come from where they are. It's not this group of players that are, your Mapimpis, your Lucanio Ams, your Zandile Sticks, your Siya Kolisis are home, celebrating with people who are from where they are from, and it was unlike anything I've ever seen. I don't know what tops that moving forward, to be honest with you.
Sure. Vata, what's the legacy of the Rugby World Cup win, and how can that legacy live into the future of South African rugby?
Oh, Tinus. After what Lloyd just said, I got quite emotional just listening to him. I think it's a reminder to South Africans, not to rugby-loving South Africans, to South Africans, of how powerful we are when we come together as one. The World Cup victory could not have come at a better time for this country. And a year on, a few weeks ago, was again just a reminder when we are in one of the darkest phases of humanity, of how we can overcome things when we come together as human beings. And for me, that is a legacy of what happened the 2nd of November last year. But I think it's also the legacy of Springbok rugby, in that you've got to go through some tough times, some painful times, in order for you to come out victorious at the end. And that team epitomizes that. It epitomizes everything that South Africa stands for, everything that the flag stands for. And I remember Stephen and I, the 2011 Rugby World Cup, I mean, it's a miserable weather. And the day the Springboks got knocked out, Stephen, if you remember, it rained in Wellington. And in fact, the week before it rained again on that day, and it clear skies afterwards. Springbok played, got beaten by Australia. The walk back to our hotels was so bad. It was so miserable. The pain of just not seeing the Springboks advance to a World Cup, which we all believe they should have won. It's those moments that make you appreciate what happened last year even more. And then you think to yourself, not what is Saudi doing or what are the players doing, but what is South Africa doing to harness the power of what the Springboks did, not just in 2019, but in 1995, in 2007, when this country is at its lowest, the Springboks somehow managed to muster, the last bit of fight to remind us how great a nation we can be. So for me, it's not just a legacy for rugby; it's a legacy for South Africa itself. And it's a reminder to every single South African that all of us need to play our role. No matter how small it is, and as small as the size is as a Faf or a Herschel, as big as Dwayne and a Sia, all of us have got to play to role. No matter what skin color, no matter where you come from. You come from Nelspruit, for goodness sake, like a Dwayne or wherever it is, it doesn't matter. All of us have got a part to play in making this country. I think what our forefathers dreamt it could be. So to me, that is the legacy of the World Cup win.
Sure, yeah. Now I'm also almost emotional. So just to look a bit forward now, Stephen, I'll end off with you from my side, and then we'll take a few from the listeners. What damage did COVID-19 do to rugby in South Africa? How did COVID-19 impact South African rugby? And the next thing we have to look forward to is obviously the Lions tour. Do you see that still going on, or with crowds, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope so, Tinus, because I won a lottery to go to the Stormers games. So. But yeah, Tinus, about COVID-19, I think the first thing that everybody will talk about is the financial impact. Obviously, it's a catastrophe for rugby unions and clubs not to be able to put in crowds. We saw in England, the clubs were saying, they need a government bailout. But one thing I will say that is really positive, because in COVID-19, we've seen a lot of positive stories come out of the hardship as well, and nice things people do for one another. And what I will say is that the way the South African rugby community pulled together to make things work, I think that was massive. You had the players organization, the rugby unions, the South African Rugby Union, and even the trade union. Everybody sat around the table and they said, how can we make this work? How can all of us survive? Nobody was just fighting for their own corner. And they came up with an industry savings plan, which really ensured the survival of the local game for a while. And I think that's a huge credit to the rugby community, the South African Rugby Union, all the people in leadership positions. And I think that if you can show that kind of unity and solidarity, I think there's something in your rugby that in there that shows that you can move forward. And obviously, an unseen thing is the extent, the effect on amateur rugby. In Western Province there are, for example, over 100 clubs, and rugby is also a means of controlling social ills. People find meaning in playing rugby, and at an amateur level, people couldn't play rugby, and so often these things are felt in ways at grassroots that people only see the professional game, and looking forward to the Lions. We can only pray, really. I think the thing is that we've seen it now is that we must not slip into a comfort zone as a nation and anywhere in the world. And, we must continue to wear our masks, continue to do all the things we need to do, because it's as if maybe we come a little bit, sometimes a little bit cavalier. And we're not, if we don't, as South Africans, all cooperate and do the right thing, and the same goes to other countries, we might not even have a Lions tour. We need to be, we aren't guaranteed that. I mean, this will very much depend on what happens in the months to come, and we can only hope. But it's really in our hands. I hate to sound as if I'm on a soapbox, but it really is in our hands to get COVID under control. Have the vaccine, that'll obviously help.
Fantastic. Now, are there any questions from the viewers?
Hi, thank you. Yes, we've got a couple of questions. A couple of questions from a couple of viewers. Let me put the first one up. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, you can.
Okay, good. Asanda asks, what was the most shocking or surprising thing you discovered while doing research for the book?
Wow. If you think shock us in this industry anymore, we've seen some things. No, I think just the whole, as I mentioned earlier, it was the first time I've done something like this, and kind of didn't really know what to expect. It's not an easy thing to do, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of late nights and appreciation for deadlines and things like that. I mean, there's nothing in the actual research that stands out now. But I remember spending some late nights, early mornings, kind of, looking at this laptop, thinking, is this thing going to end? Is it going to get done? And that took me to some challenging, dark places. So that discovery is probably the one thing that stands out about the actual process, and just you got to be on top of it from the beginning, otherwise it can get away from you quickly.
Well, I think that relates to the next question. You've kind of answered the second part of this question. Caitlin asks, what was one highlight you experienced in writing this book? Perhaps that part of the question, because that's the other part you've kind of answered now.
The people who I spoke to, and there were a lot of interviews that were done, were, you could sense the kind of pride in them talking about what they had done. The players who were there, the coaching staff who was there, and like being in this privileged position to share their thoughts on what had happened. It was an incredible effort, an incredible achievement, and being that close to those stories was something I'll appreciate moving forward. I think just how honest everyone was. The franchises were great. You had your media people at Sharks, Stormers, Lions helping out with interviews. Rassie was just fantastic, absolute gold in terms of value, and him talking about what happened. So being that close to that feeling of pride that these guys all felt.
Cool. Yeah, I can feel it coming through in the conversation. Let's see. Asanda says, a question for Vata and Stephen. If you had written this book, is there anything you would have included that Lloyd left out? Perhaps which one would you like to answer?
There's a lot of stuff I would have included. Chasing the sun.
I'll go first, Steve. I think, first of all down to Lloyd for writing a book. And I think it takes a lot of of perseverance and tenacity just to sit down and put so many words together, but also be able to tell the story so well. Look at the title of the book. It's just so apt for they are miracle men. And Lloyd, again, well done, mate. Well done.
Thank you,
I
Vata.
don't have the patience, and I don't have the time to even try and discover what it's like to go to dark places within myself late at night. So I'll leave that to a guy like Lloyd to do, and maybe I think Stephen's got he's got the patience and the wherewithal to really do something great. He's got wonderful stories. He's seen wonderful things and sad things. But I mean, I'll leave it to these guys. I mean,
Yeah. No, look, Lloyd, I want to join Vata in congratulating you. And I'm not going to pick any holes in a great book. So yeah, really congratulations. I know you go to dark places to write the book. I've been there myself. It's not as good a book as yours, but I tried. But yeah, so no, to be honest, no, I think I really think you did a great job. And it's so nice that a book celebrates people's achievements, because often we read rugby books and the person whose autobiography it is, maybe not so much in South Africa, but sees it as a means of getting even and saying something nasty about someone else in order to write books. So the fact that you are celebrating achievements, I think it's fantastic to have books like that out there. On a personal note, my son after the World Cup final took his first steps. So maybe I would have, maybe I should have found a way of putting that in the prologue. I don't know. Lloyd, well done.
Sweet.
I think you can be very proud.
Thank you very much.
And then there's another last question from Caitlin. She says, from book number 2, which sport would be your dream team to write about? Say, for instance, if they won their World Cup. Any other favorite sports?
Yeah, Tinus and I could agree on, when we were in England 2019, we had big hopes for the Proteas when we got there, and they disappeared very quickly. So it was a lot
after the first weekend of a 6 week.
They were dead and buried after a week of a 7-week tournament. So yeah, I mean, hopefully one day we'll be in a position where we can tell the story of a successful Proteas team, which I think South African sport's been waiting for ever, really. Yeah.
Those are the questions we've had. So, Tinus, I don't know if you have any sort of closing or final remarks. Or...
Yeah, I mean, just thank you very much for talking so open and honestly about the book, Lloyd. It's really a fascinating book. The amount of detail that's in there, and it's impossible in an hour, a bit more than an hour, to go into all the details. So people just have to go and buy the book to see. Also, the planning around the referees. There's so many things that's just amazing about it. And Stephen and Vata, you are the grand masters of this industry. So thank you for joining us and sharing your knowledge. So yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
just from us for joining us. I mean, it was a really interesting conversation. Got quite emotional.
If I can just say thanks to everyone as well, Jennifer, just Tinus and Vata and Stephen. At the beginning of this, I remember there were so many people who helped, people I look up to in the industry who chipped in with assistance along the way. And the biggest thing for me, way more important than any kind of, sales or anything, was just doing the story justice and, the reaction and from the people in the industry that I respect the most. So to have you three in a room discussing this is fantastic for me, and I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Lloyd, and congrats again. We're really proud of you.
Cheers.
Bafana must win. You must write
Yeah,
a
thanks
soccer.
everyone for. Yeah, that would be nice. Winning the AFCON maybe in a couple of years' time. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us for a World Cup. Are we aiming high? Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thanks everyone. It was a really interesting conversation. It got quite emotional there at the end. I think we all were shedding a tear. And thanks to Jonathan Ball for publishing the book. And yeah, if you haven't bought a copy, go out and get a copy now. Quite a few bookshops are having Black Friday sales, so it's a good time to buy books, and it's a good time to buy this book. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Jennifer. Thanks, guys.